name is Lily, welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to be basically doing something that I think is a little bit different. I am going to be going through all the characters in the musical Hamilton and talking to you about what vibe they give me and thus what book I think represents their character to me. This is just going to be a bit of fun. If you disagree with me, that's totally fine. In fact, if you disagree with me enough to make your own video, I'd love to see you do that too. You may not know this, but I am quite a big musical fan and Hamilton is probably one of my favourite musicals of all time. So yeah, I love all these characters. I've gone for pretty much all the major characters and a couple of side characters too, almost all the named characters in the musical. First up, of course, is Alexander Hamilton. He is the leading man of the entire musical. He is a dreamer and he is building up his own little sort of group to help lead this rebellion together and to scheme together, and he will scheme to get what he wants and get to the top, and he is not afraid to do things that are a little bit questionable. So the book that I think represents him is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Like you know. I'm gonna take this out here. Go find it. The book I think represents him is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I think he has a lot of similar traits to Kell. Kell is always looking to bring in the best of the best into his crew, and he is actually trying to do things that are for himself but still for the greater good as well. He's not, you know, he's not going to throw the whole world under the bus for his own riches, which is a good thing. I think there's a lot of parallels between this book and Alexander Hamilton's character. The next character I'm going to talk about is Aaron Burr. In Hamilton, Aaron Burr is kind of like a, I don't know, he's a very morally grey character. He is purely in it for the power. He wants to get to the top however he can. And well, I mean, you know from the start of the musical it's not going to end well for Aaron Burr. And I think that the book that really represents that for me is The Humans by Matt Haig, because in The Humans, Professor Andrew Martin's body gets taken over by this alien, and this alien constantly is trying to learn from the situations and what's going on around him how to be Andrew Martin, to fit in to the world and to please everyone, which I think is something that Aaron Burr does a lot, is he observes and listens and waits to see what do people want to hear, how can I fit into this crowd to make this crowd like me. I think that's what the alien that takes over the professor's body does a lot, and this is a very bittersweet story because obviously this alien has taken over this person's body, but this person has a whole life, and these people start to notice that something's different with the professor. And I think that's the same thing with Aaron Burr, where people start to smell a rat and they start to realise that, as Hamilton says, Burr has no beliefs. He just sort of tries to be a chameleon. I think this book really represents that well. So if you are interested in Aaron Burr's character, I'd really recommend this book to explore that more. Next up we have Angelica Schuyler. She is probably the biggest female character in the whole of Hamilton. She is the definition of a strong, independent woman who is going to tell the men in the musical what for. I really like the fact that she just sort of tells Hamilton how it is, and you know, when he's messed up, she tells him. But what I also think is interesting about her character is she's very gentle towards her sisters, and she is always looking out for their best interests. She knows that she has to marry well, and even though she loves Alexander Hamilton, she knows she can't marry him, so instead she takes him to someone else who she thinks will love him just as much as her, and that's her sister. I think that fierce sisterly love, but also that strong female independence and telling men what's what, really comes out in A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas, because I think Feyre is so very similar to Angelica Schuyler in a lot of ways. She is the one at the beginning of this book who is looking after her sisters and is making sure they survive, but once she gets taken into the land of fairy, she very quickly adapts to tell people, you know, like, she's not scared of telling anyone in any of the series if she thinks they're an idiot, and she is determined to be independent and determined to rely on herself even when she's in the land of fairy. I think her and Angelica Schuyler are very, very similar. Eliza Hamilton is a lot different to her sisters. She is much softer and gentler, and I kind of define her as soft resistance. She's not meek, she's not mild. She definitely will tell the characters in the musical and in real life, I guess, when she thinks something's wrong, and she does stand up for herself, but she does things in a more quiet and measured and subtle way than all the others. And the book that really defined that quiet resistance to me was Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyang, because I think the main characters in this book, admittedly, yes, we do get a big sort of scene at some point. I do think that Lei is doing a very subtle form of resistance. She is sneaking around to find out what's going on, and she is very silently and quietly resisting the king. And I think that is really the essence of what Eliza Hamilton is like. The whole joke, like the whole running joke in Hamilton is that Peggy is the underdog, the forgotten, the side character. She's sort of like the third wheel in this sister ship. And I think honestly there is one book that is a definition of being the side character, being the forgotten ones, and that is Dumplin' by Julie Murphy. I think this book really just captures that exact feeling of being the outsider and having family members who are so much, who, I don't know, they burn more brightly than you and people respect them more than you for things that you can't help. And I think that is exactly the tone of Peggy's character, is that, you know, you have Angelica and Eliza and they're these big wonderful characters, and Peggy. And I think that that's how Dumplin' feels. And Dumplin' is, you know, her mother is this ex-beauty queen, she's wonderful and everyone loves her. Oh, and then there's Dumplin'. So yeah, I think this is a really good representation of how Peggy was characterised in the musical. Sorry if the camera angle changed, I had to just pause for a bit while my neighbour took her dog out because it made a lot of noise. So anyway, the Marquis de Lafayette is a huge fan favourite. He is a leader of the people and he's very, very charismatic. And I thought there was one book that really defines those three things, and that is Aurora Rising by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I do really think that this is a fan favourite book, and the characters in this are charismatic, they're leaders, they are so lovable, and I just, yeah, this is just Lafayette in a book, I think, personally. If we know one thing about John Laurens, it's that he is wanting to liberate the people of America, in particular the slaves. So I thought there's only one book that really stands out to me as being one about liberation and freedom and giving people equal rights, and that is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, because the whole point of this book is that the Orisha have been oppressed, the magic has been forced away, and this book is about bringing that magic back and bringing people back their rights. Hercules Mulligan is originally a tailor, and that's what he is at the start of the Hamilton musical, but he very quickly becomes a soldier and then a spy, and he has this constantly changing role, and it's sort of very secretive and you wouldn't expect that of him. He's a bit of an underdog character as well, and I think the perfect book for that is Warcross by Marie Lu, because in Warcross, Amika Chen starts off as this bounty hunter and that is her job, but when she breaks into the Warcross Championship, she is asked to then become a spy, but is also working on one of the teams, which is essentially like being a soldier. So I think Amika Chen and Hercules Mulligan have a very similar character arc, and I really like that progression. I think it's very interesting to have someone come from nothing and become this spy and become this sort of amazing big person in their communities like Amika and Hercules Mulligan do. George Washington is one hell of a leader in this whole musical. Like, he just is a huge commanding presence, and even when he sings his finale song, you just feel it. And the baritoneness of it, is it a baritone? I can't really tell, I can't remember, but the depth of his voice really just like commands the whole stage, and he is such a strong leader, and he's very he's slightly controversial at points, but he is a very effective leader. And I think Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas really incorporates that. The series itself is full of strong leaders with commanding presences who just build up these followings, and they come from all these different places, and some of them are controversial and others aren't, but it is really just that commanding presence, especially Aelin, and Chaol has at times, and Dorian as he comes into things. You know, it's just such the power and the leadership in these books really reminds me of George Washington, and how, you know, the minute he steps on the stage, you know that's George Washington, you know he's someone important. I think you really get that vibe from people in Throne of Glass. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson, we're on to like the second act characters now. Thomas Jefferson, he is very charismatic, and he's very, I don't know, he's very Marmite. A lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him. And he's someone who enters the musical previously unknown to the musical, and immediately comes back to America and he gets power straight away. He gets made Secretary of State. having previously been in France. And so it's this immediate amount of power. He's a very oppositional person. Not everyone likes what he does, and he's constantly butting heads with Alexander Hamilton. And also something that I think is very important about him is that he has come from one role to a vastly different role. So he was an ambassador in France, and now he's Secretary of State. And I think that the book that really captures that sudden surge of power and sudden transition of role is an absolutely remarkable thing by Hank Green. I think actually both the author and the book represent Thomas Jefferson in a lot of ways, because Hank Green previously was well known for his YouTube channel with John Green, his brother, who is also an author, and it was kind of a little bit of a shock, I would say, in the community when he said he was writing a book and it was coming out, because I think no one really knew that he was doing that, and I think that's really cool. And then obviously the whole theme of the book is that suddenly April gets this influx of followers and subscribers and all this influence, and she's suddenly all over the news. And I think that's how Thomas Jefferson feels in the musical. He suddenly arrives and he is here and he is a big character and he's got all this power all of a sudden. And yeah, I think this book and Hank Green himself are very reflective of Thomas Jefferson's character in Hamilton. Okay, so this is going to be one that I think people are going to disagree with me on quite a bit, but King George. He is obviously mostly in there as a comic relief character. He breaks up the scenes quite nicely with his interludes, but what I thought was really interesting about his character is that George clearly thinks that he's in the right and these people are all stupid and ridiculous and he is the good guy, and they're just ignoring how much of a good guy he is. And I think the only book I could really think of where someone thinks they're the good guy when they're very clearly not is Vicious by V. Schwab. Because obviously we have the two opposing sides. We have Victor and Eli, who are roommates, and they basically stumble upon this way to give themselves powers. And obviously Victor is the one that we follow in the book. It's mostly from his perspective. But Victor is very clear on the fact that he doesn't see himself as good or bad. But Eli, on the other hand, is very much of the opinion that he is the good guy. He follows the word of God and he is here to sort of fix things and to solve the problem that he created. Whereas actually when you read the book, you start to see that if you see it from Victor's perspective, Eli's not as good as he thinks he is. And I think that really reflects how Hamilton is from the Americans' perspective, and you can see how the British thought they were good, but they clearly weren't, especially if you look from that perspective. Maria Reynolds is obviously like the definition of guilty pleasures, trying to say no to things and not being able to, and tricks and thievery and all these sort of like twisty-turny things. And there's one book that I just think is that in a nutshell. Caraval by Stephanie Garber. Because the whole point of Caraval is that Scarlett has to avoid temptation. She has to try and focus on finding Teller and saving Teller's life. And that is really sort of similar to how Alexander Hamilton has really just got to try and say no to Maria Reynolds in order to keep his happy life. And I think there's so many like guilty pleasures and tricks and moments of, I don't know, just trickery in this book that really sort of brings out that vibe, but it's also quite sultry and seductive in the way that Maria Reynolds is. I have one last character I would like to cover in this video, and this is going to be a little bit spoilery for Hamilton if you haven't seen it yet, so you may want to just skip to the end once I've put down the book that I'm going to hold up for this character if you don't want any spoilers at all for Hamilton. So, Philip Hamilton, he is the definition of sort of youth and overconfidence of youth and how that can lead to tragedy, and he is just sort of the definition of tragedy as well. And there's one book that I think represents that, The Year After You by Nina DePass. Now, this book, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but this book also shows you how the overconfidence of youth can lead to tragedy, and the whole book is about tragedy and grief. And Philip Hamilton, he brings the grief and the tragedy to Hamilton. He is the one that gives you It's Quiet Uptown, you know, he is the definition of tragedy, just like this book is. And if you had that aching feeling and you want to sit with that aching feeling more, this is the kind of book you would read. It is such an incredible book, and it just really delves into grief and tragedy in the way that Philip's death in Hamilton did. Okay, so those are all the books. I hope you really enjoyed this because this is a lot of fun to try and think of books that represented the characters to me. It took me quite a while to figure out some of them because they were quite difficult. There were some where I had like 3 or 4 different books I could have picked for them, and others where I was really stuck, and it was honestly so much fun. I've already got other movies and musicals that I would love to do this for, so if you thought this was a really fun video to watch, let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed this, because this was a lot of fun for me to do. And also I'd love to hear what you think about the books that I picked for the different characters, and whether you think that I was right, was I wrong, was I accurate? So yeah, let me all know down in the comments. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more from my channel. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!